When We Disagree is a show about arguments, how we have them, why we have them, and their impact on our relationships and ourselves. We all like to think we're rational beings who form our opinions based on the best available evidence. But here's an uncomfortable truth. We typically decide what we believe first, then cherry pick evidence to support it. As Paul Simon sang in the song The Boxer, we hear what we want to hear, and we disregard the rest. This mental shortcut, called a confirmation bias, shapes everything from our news consumption to our relationship conflicts. Psychologist Peter Wasson demonstrated this in the 1960s with a simple number puzzle sequence. Given the numbers 2 and 4 and 6, people had to guess the rule or pattern between them. Most assumed these numbers are increasing by 2 and only tested sequences that confirmed their initial hypothesis. But the actual rule was just ascending numbers, but people rarely tested sequences that might disprove their initial guess, and we all do this constantly. You're convinced your teenager is irresponsible, then you'll notice every forgotten chore while overlooking their punctual homework submissions. And think your boss is playing favorite, you'll catalog every perceived slight while dismissing evidence of fair treatment. Our brains are meaning-making machines that prefer consistency over accuracy. Social media amplifies this tendency, serving us content that confirms what we already believe. But confirmation bias predates the internet by millennia. Medieval physicians, convinced that bloodletting worked, noticed when patients recovered after a bloodletting, but explained away deaths as being from other causes. Confirmation bias, whether it's old or new, on the internet or in medieval times, makes disagreements particularly intractable. Two people can witness the same event and honestly remember it differently, each having unconsciously filtered the experience through their expectations. This isn't lying, it's just how memory works. We literally see what we expect to see. So fighting confirmation bias requires some deliberate effort. Scientists use double-blind studies and peer review. And in daily life, we might actively seek disconfirming evidence, play devil's advocate with ourselves, cultivate friendships with people who see the world differently, talk to strangers, etc. When disagreeing with someone, understanding confirmation bias helps us recognize they're not necessarily being stubborn or dishonest, they're seeing a different reality, filtered through different expectations. And this awareness can transform adversarial debates into hopefully collaborative searches for the truth. I'm Michael Lee, Professor of Communication and Director of the Civility Initiative at the College of Charleston. Our guest today on When We Disagree is Vince Greer. Vince is a Chicago native who is the Assistant Vice President of Student Affairs for Dialogue and Diversity at Claremont McKenna College, where he's been for about a decade. Vince, tell us an argument story.
Yeah, absolutely. First of all, thank you for having me, Mike. I would start with one that's often lingered in my head for some time, and it's more recent. I'd say a couple of years ago, a really dear friend of mine, who I've known for well over a decade now, we tend to have a little bit of philosophical differences around, some society topics and issues, which is totally fine and normal. But I did find myself more recently, as I would say, even the political landscape started to heat up a bit, I felt myself responding in a way that I hadn't usually. And for me, the work that I do is one that centers around dialogue, really encouraging a range of opinions and perspectives. And yet I wasn't practicing what I was preaching. I found myself having a bit more emotional responses, mostly because from my perspective at the time, I had made clear some things and it felt like it was being undermined. And I felt myself maybe pulling back to some of my upbringing roots, if you will, of where I grew up. I felt myself getting a lot more aggressive than I felt comfortable at this point in my life. So it's an argument that sat with me because I think it brought out maybe some old roots or emotions. And I just felt like that's not the way I want to live my life, nor that's the way I want to respect a friend.
Say more, if you don't mind, about the particulars of maybe one or two of these conversations where you felt like you were reverting, as you put it, in real time.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think to get a little bit more specific, we had some pretty clear differences with regards to social political issues that centered around women and other different identities and communities, but that one in particular was one where we often would fork in our opinions. And um, I could be very passionate about my thoughts and beliefs, as he is as well. But I felt like there was a bit of antagonism that was motivated in perhaps his delivery, and that for me felt a little more personal. And so, I tried to take the route initially of expressing some of those concerns and thoughts, and we had a productive
Uh-huh.
conversation, but we would yet find ourselves back in this same sort of spiral cycle again. And um, so I found myself raising my voice a lot more, and getting a lot more animated and passionate in ways that I'm like, hey, we're both grown men. There's no reason I should be talking to you in this way, and I know you wouldn't want me. I wouldn't want that in return either.
Yeah, and this is about, to be clear, at least in this instance, is about women's role in politics or abortion
Yeah,
rights or
yeah. So to be specific, women's rights across the board. So whether
okay.
in politics, in the household,
Yeah,
um, yeah, we just had I would deem his approach as a bit more traditional, old fashioned,
gotcha.
um, and you know, my words, no one else's, perhaps a bit outdated. Where it felt as I would characterize as a bit more misogynistic, and I didn't want to call him that because
Uh,
I didn't want to revert to name calling, but at the same time, this was constantly an issue, and we have a pretty close friend circle. It's about a half dozen of us, and so we're regularly interacting and talking about the
yeah,
different things in the world. And as headlines emerged, different rulings, a lot of different things would come out. We would find ourselves on a polar opposite end of our opinions around these things. And like I said, what started out as feeling a bit, maybe just contentious lightly, has started to heat up a lot more. And I'm just like, hey, we're friends. We don't have to go this route. But yet I found myself maybe being baited a little bit.
you felt yourself being responding differently. You said
Yep.
maybe you were being baited a little bit. That there was some escalation and purposeful provocation. What the literature talks about as conflict profiteering,
I like
right?
that.
Going on, and yet at the same time, your work on campus and your research, your practice as a professional encourages different points of view. And you
Exactly.
said you are experiencing some tension between what you were practicing and what you were preaching. I want to pause on that for a second. So let's just talk about the emotionality and the voice raising.
Yes.
Is it when you are encouraging students or you're researching, you're practicing, encouraging different points of view, just speaking as a professional, how do you handle the role of emotion and voice raising?
That is a critical turning point. Oftentimes, I try to frame these types of conversations because they're so delicate in a way that it's critical to, first of all, enter into it with a level of intentionality. What are you hoping to get out of this? If you're looking for a dialogue, let's stay in a space of dialogue. And that does require a level of intentionality in how we ask the types of questions, how we're listening, how we respond to things that we disagree with. And so if I find myself raising my voice or starting to shift where it feels a bit more aggressive, I know that that dialogue is now shifted at least to a space of debate, perhaps, or even more escalated tensions, which isn't going to be productive for either party. So these are the moments where, I have to apply that in my own life. And I felt myself, not practicing what I preached in that moment. And it sat with me a lot because I can't say that this is something I'm really passionate about. This is work I do on a day to day. And
Yeah.
then when I'm challenged in that moment, not apply those same things.
This is utterly fascinating to me because you've sketched these two Vinces.
Yeah.
There's the kind of emotionally invested Vince who thinks, here I am across from somebody who putting words, to a person I've never met, but just pretending. It's like this person is saying women shouldn't have the right to vote. I find that absurd and discriminatory, and I'm going to tell him as such. I'm going to tell him what time it is. And then there's
Yes.
professional Vince who's like, no, we approach this from a sober, rational space of curiosity. So wouldn't the more emotionally invested Vince tell the more professionally oriented Vince, hey, sometimes people cross a line and you need to show them you can't suppress your emotions if they're imagining a world in which you don't even have the right to vote, or huge groups of people don't have the right to vote.
I mean, I think the way you summarize it is so accurate. And I mean, I felt myself in these two worlds clashing. I
Uh,
love the way you sort of frame that. And what I would say is that the emotional one is one where I can still lean in a place of understanding, but I don't have to come in as hot. And I really stand by it. This is a professional mantra of mine that I learned from a mentor pretty early in my career. Is it more important to be right or effective? And this is a moment where those really sort of came to a head. The rubber meets the road, so to speak. And so this is a critical opportunity. Am I going to be the person that really tries to push my agenda or perspective or whatever that may be, no matter how much I may really care about that or be passionate or even perhaps think I'm right on some level? There's a friendship, there's an opportunity to better understand where this person is coming from. I think for me, the one thing, and I'll pause for a moment, that I what was challenging is that I don't always feel that every perspective deserves a platform, particularly when it's hateful or really encourages marginalizing groups solely on the basis of their identity. So I think that was the part where the emotion started to really come out.
Yeah, and the I would add to the right or effective, and I really like that question. You know, I've heard that question famously from Esther Perel, who says
Yes.
to couples, right, do you want to be right or do you want to be married, which is among my favorite lines. And when I'm doing this kind of work that you and I are engaged in, you know, I just adapt that to say, you know, do you want to be right or do you want to be in a relationship? And that relationship could be with your roommate, with your coworkers, with your fellow citizens who you'll never meet, and of course with people that you're in an immediate argument with. But the other thing, going back to kind of more emotionally invested, let's just call him for the sake of argument, kind of more righteous Vince, right?
Yes.
So righteous Vince would also say, I think the point of this discussion, when you say something that is that licenses taking away the rights or making people unsafe based on identity times tens of millions of people. The
Right.
point is not about being right or effective, but it's also about, am I suppressing my emotions so that you feel more comfortable in this discussion? Am I suppressing my emotions and how monstrous I think your point of view is, so that you and I can have the theater of a peaceful disagreement? But
Yeah.
really, what I'm doing is letting you off the hook for you not knowing the real consequences of these ideas in terms of people's lives, livelihoods, and emotional stability.
I love that. And I think the other layer, because these are often nuanced, right? I think if
Yeah.
you just hear, oh, this is just two different opinions or perspectives, or hey, we just happen to have different political ideologies or leanings, whatever it may
Right.
be.
I like onions,
Uh,
you don't. Great.
right. But there's often much more layers to this. And I know this person, this is a really good friend of mine pretty
Right.
intimately. And so I know that in his case, and uniquely, I can't speak for others, that this is also connected to some deep-seated trauma, some really challenging things that he's experienced in his life, that is gender specific as well. And so
Mhm.
I'm not going down the psychologist or psychiatric route or any of those sort of things. I'm not licensed, or that's not my expertise. But he shared enough with me around his childhood traumas and certain things that I do think some of this may be directly correlated.
Right. Right. And so in those moments, it's easier because you're longstanding friends, right? Perhaps
Exactly.
easier for you to be curious. You have a little bit more knowledge. You can be sensitive to disagreements. You can be charitable and say, I know this person is not the sum total of his problematic opinions, right? And our
Yes.
relationship is not defined by our disagreements, even on important issues. So there's more to our relationship than just, are we aligned politically, socially on everything, including gender?
Yeah, I mean, there's a different level of grace there to that point because the relationship's been established. And so I have more insight in that sense. That for me doesn't negate some of the things that are being shared. And I think that's why my emotional response and this sort of heated moment, and to be clear, this was probably about a 2 week window
Okay.
where this just kept coming up. So this wasn't a one-off. This is why it sticks with me, because I had this sort of moment afterwards of, okay, first of all, if I'm responding like this in this way, I need to reevaluate our friendship. I need to reevaluate how I'm responding. And also, again, I want to practice what I preach. And so this keeps happening, and this is a thing. And here's an opportunity to disrupt this, or do we continue this? And so I made a decision, obviously, to look more inwardly, be more mindful of my approach, and also to take a little bit of space and time from that friendship. We're in a much better place now, but I do think that that space was needed. Otherwise, I think I would have kept reacting in that way.
Your role is fascinating in the sense that on campuses and in communities around your college, around Claremont McKenna, you are getting folks together frequently on purpose to have difficult dialogues, right?
Yes,
Is a really core part of your work at
absolutely.
Claremont McKenna. And so you have ample opportunity to model what you preach and to practice what you preach, which is this kind of grace giving, humility, curiosity, finding a collective goal, and then working back to a set of conversational practices that enable mutual understanding, not necessarily debate or agreement and being right, but just having some curiosity and some grace for different points of view. So that's in a setting, encouraging a dynamic between two people. But what is also keeps coming up for me in this moment, as we're talking about this episode and why this sticks with you, this individual conversation, is about the dynamic between these two Vinces that we keep talking about and encouraging
Yes.
each of these. How do you encourage each of these Vinces to have grace and respect for each other? And so, taking the point of view of the more righteous Vince, what can the righteous Vince learn from professional Vince?
I think the righteous Vince can learn the importance of patience and recognizing that we all had a starting point, and for some folks, we are married to our perspectives. This is what we believe because of the world that we've lived in. And that's totally fine. But I also have to recognize that I'm creating room for evolution. The person I am present day isn't the person I was 10, 20, 15 years ago, whatever that may be. And so the reality is that if I'm holding you to whatever standard or applying these expectations and not recognizing we're on our own journey, I'm going to continue to react this way. I think part of that was because this person knows how passionate I am about this. This isn't just a 9 to 5, but I really do try to live my life around similar principles. And yet, the important reminder for me is, irregardless of how much you may try, depending on the situation, that can be challenged. And how do you respond in those moments? I'm a big sports proponent, and it's one thing you can practice over and over and have your moves down to a T. But what happens in that pressurized situation? What happens when you're now put in a position where all of those things you practice, you have to execute it under pressure or in a way where you're not necessarily comfortable? And that's really for me where the execution is most necessary. So when I think about this situation, it's not in a structured dialogue where we've established community guidelines and all of the necessary guardrails to have a very intentional conversation. But it's really those organic conversations that either happen in a group chat or just with friends or maybe a complete stranger for that matter.
Yeah, one of the great sports lines of the 20th century, right? Everybody's got a plan until they get punched in the mouth by the
You know it.
by the poet laureate Mike Tyson. So
Everything changes.
what does we said what does righteous Vince have to learn from professional dialogue Vince? And then let's flip it. What
Yeah.
does professional dialogue Vince have to learn from more argumentative righteous Vince?
Oh, that is a more challenging question for me in a lot of ways. But what I would say is that um, I do suppress some of my passion um, strategically, because I think I want to create a space where there's a range of opinions and perspectives that can be voiced without hesitation or self-censoring or a lot of things that we do for a number of reasons. And I do think as a result of that, if you fully approach things from a neutrality, um, that is just by default, there are some things that can be missed along the way. And so, um, I would say probably the more self-righteous version of myself um, that can be still applied professionally is to have passion, conviction, but not in a way where I'm looking to tear someone apart or shout someone into another perspective because that is never going to work. But there is a line there where I think I can bring a little of that passion and not just simply take a middle ground neutral approach. There are some issues, even like this one that we talked about, that neutrality isn't going to be the answer. The reality is we have to take a stance, and certainly when, in my case, from my perspective, when we're talking about removing rights and a lot of things for folks, that's just not something that sits well with me.
Yeah, and I think there could be perhaps a difference between neutrality and impartiality from a perspective of, what's the best pitch you got? Like, we're still going to call balls and strikes, but I'm willing to stand up here just to keep these sports metaphors going. I'm willing to stand up here and have you pitch me some pitches. I'm going to still try to hit them. Right. I'm not just going to say all pitches are good pitches and all pitches are created equal no matter. We're still going to call balls and strikes. And I'm also still going to play the game and try to hit them. I'm not just going to take every pitch. Right. And so it will still be contentious, but it'll be contentious with additional emphasis placed on understanding, curiosity, and humility with an eye towards some persuadability. I'm not just coming into this and going to stonewall you and say there's nothing you can say that's ever going to change my mind. Right. And try to humanize this disagreement and say, maybe there's something going on in your past that I don't know about that's led you to this point of view. And I'm not a computer either. I haven't just assessed literally every study on these questions and said, well, this is the right answer. And therefore all my opinions are the height of rationality and all of your opinions are the height of emotionality.
Yeah. I love all of those things are interwoven. We don't ever just fully escape it or compartmentalize. And even in this conversation, I found myself, and by my own admission, even, compartmentalizing some of those things when there's a healthy way to involve emotions, facts, challenge misinformation, a lot of different things that can happen. And respect is the one thing that can't be compromised. And I think that's the reason at its core why it's set with me in such a lasting way was because it wasn't just about the passion. It wasn't about me just raising my voice. But I knew that I was disrespecting someone because of my frustrations in that moment. And that's the one thing where the line shifts. We could be completely on whatever sort of ends of our opinions and perspectives. But the moment respect gets compromised, the dynamic changes completely, whether it's a relationship or even just someone you're meeting for the first time. And so I never want to be in that position.
Vince Greer, thank you so much for being on When We Disagree.
Yes, my pleasure. Thank you for the opportunity again, Mike, and looking forward to tuning in to more awesome shows as well.
When We Disagree is recorded at the College of Charleston with creator and host Michael Lee. Recording and sound engineering by Jesse Kunz and Lance Laidlaw. Reach out to us at whenwedisagree@gmail.com.